Hello subscribers and welcome to our subscription video. This time I'm joined by Peter Ebrup and you'll be getting coffee from Colombia. In fact, you'll be getting 2 bags of Enciso and a bag of Jaime Casallas for filter. And the same for espresso. The coffee shop downstairs was so nice to hand brew these 2 delicious for us. Jaime, over here, you can pour the Enciso. You're the one responsible for sourcing these coffees. If people have been watching these videos, they already know that. You've been on this little show a bunch of times.
Yes.
We've had these 2 coffees on the menu for a few months, Enciso and Jaime. But the ones that you're getting this time is fresh crop that has literally just arrived in Copenhagen. And you're the first one getting this fresh crop. It's on the menu and then we get fresh crop. How does it work in Colombia?
It's a harvest that spans about 8 months of the year in reality.
Because every harvest starts with the flowering on the coffee tree. And from each of these flowers, you get a little node that transforms or that starts growing the actual coffee cherries.
Yeah.
So if you don't have flowering, you don't have coffee, basically. And from flowering to picking, it's about 9 months.
Yeah, it's the same as a baby.
Ripening, same as a baby, yeah, exactly.
And a lot of the agriculture is reliant on the stability of weather and climate, especially in Colombia. And if you talk about Jaime, for example, they've been growing coffee since the 50s in that specific region. And for between the 50s and up towards the 90s, it's very stable. So the harvest has been very consistent. You will get drought at this point, you will get water at this point, it will turn cooler at this point, it will get warmer at this point. And being in these tropical environments, that is rainforest environments, of course rain is a massive part of their everyday life. So it's not a lack of water, it's often more when and where. So often they'll find these droughts in periods where they actually do need rain, and suddenly they'll find rain in periods where, for example, there's a lot of cherry on the tree, and if there's a lot of water when there's cherry on the tree, the water will of course suck up to the tree and get exposed to the cherries, and the cherries will balloon up, and it ruins the crop that way. If you have drought at the flowering stage, you also you get the same issue. You don't get the nutrients and the water needed to develop from flower to cherry. And if you have too much rain, you have trouble with pollination. So it's a very delicate. It is a delicate product, and it requires a lot of attention in the different stages to make it work.
So can you explain a little bit how is the whole process during a harvest season?
Being that there's 2 main harvests and it takes 9 months from flower to cherry or ripe cherry, then you could imagine that all year round there's a process of developing cherry. Some places around the world will have this intermediate period where nothing is really happening and a lot of the pruning and stuff happens there. But for Colombia, it happens year round. So you will see flowering, cherry, picking, flowering continuously, and also sometimes at the same time.
But that must make it really hard for the farmers. While you're picking, you actually have new flowering happening. So you don't have that break between.
Yeah, it is very difficult, and this selective hand picking, of course, makes it very meticulous work. You can't strip trees in the same way as you can in some regions where the cherries have a tendency to ripen more around the same time. Here you'll find branches in Colombia, and it's actually very beautiful pictures you get out of Colombia, where you'll have very ripe cherries, you'll have early cherries in a green stage, and you also have flowering on the same branch, which means that process is just a continuation and it just circles around.
But if you think about that process as well, that means that when you do that selective hand picking, you gotta be extra careful to only take out the really ripe ones without damaging any of the flowers, because that'll mean you won't have harvest from those flowers later in that year. And the same if you hurt any leaves, you won't have photosynthesis. It's a very difficult word to happening. And you also don't want to ruin or destroy any of the green cherries that are in developing.
No, exactly, because it's all your product. It's where your money comes from, with what you do. So it is a difficult process, and with these 2 farmers, it's quite interesting because you have kind of 2 different sizes. You have Enciso, which in Colombian standards is kind of a medium-sized farm, about 15 hectares. And then you have a smaller farm in Jaime that has about 3.5 hectares of coffee growing. So in Jaime's case, they themselves can do a lot of the selective picking. It's the family who takes care of most of it and the maintenance of the land. And of course, them being the end seller in a way to us, that means that they have a lot of control over the whole process. Whereas in the Enciso family's case, they have to hire pickers in, which adds another level of complexity in terms of training and making sure that you get the most out of your land. It is very meticulous.
Straight after harvesting, they'll take the coffee to be processed, and these are both washed, processed coffees. I've been to visit Jaime, so I've seen his small wet mill, basically, or washing station, which is quite small but very efficient, beautifully set up. Concrete building around the fermentation tanks to keep the temperature lower, and it was clear that he's done a lot of experimentation in the processing side of things. But it also means that he has like constant processing going on at the farm as well, because the coffee needs to be processed right after picking. So it's a lot of like smaller volumes. At what point does he then collect that like into a batch or into a micro lot?
So for in Jaime's case, it is there's a continuous push in all phases of the processing. The bottleneck being, of course, the drying, which is why he's prioritized the drying stage so much, because in
that's
Colombia,
the biggest bottleneck.
Because they try to extend the drying a lot in Colombia to avoid this dreaded Colombia drop. Drying can be anywhere in between 20 to 30 days, which is a long time.
And the Colombian drop is when the coffee's been dried too fast. It's actually becomes a little more porous because the water is escaping really fast, and that means that the coffee very quickly, once it's here in Denmark or any consuming countries, will start to taste woody. But they've worked very meticulous on avoiding that.
Exactly, it's been a huge emphasis. But that also means that when the trees ripen at different stages, and there's a continuous ripening of different cherries, you do continuous picking, which means that at least every 14 days, every 2 weeks, they go out and they pick a batch. And they pick a certain area where it seems like there's the most ripe trees, and then they pick that batch, and then they process that, and then they keep that aside. What they also do is that they separate from variety, and of course there are lots set up to have specific varieties in specific areas. So it's quite a logistical nightmare to make it all kind of fit with drying times, drying spaces, because they also dry in 2 phases. First, it needs to be shaded when it's really wet, and then it needs to be exposed more when it's drier. You need one temperature at a certain point. You need to keep up with humidity levels and temperature in your drying tents, and all that needs to work together to culminate where the right humidity or the
moisture level,
level in the bean is there, and then you need to bag it and then remove it from sunshine and weather and all that stuff, and then you need to transport it
to the dry mill.
Not even to the dry mill, to the collection mill first, where they do the first physical analysis, where they then see what is the base kind of. Where do we assume the quality is at? So they then can pick.
And they do that as a cupping or just as an evaluation of the parchment?
Both.
Or
So they can actually bring down to that collection station. They can bring it down within 2 hours. They will actually have a full cupping of it, which is very unique.
Which again is there's so many things I want to point out that's different than a regular farm, because a regular farm could just take in the harvest continuously. I would never call anyone lazy, but maybe they don't have the resources to hire in pickers, or maybe the family isn't big enough that they can go pick the cherries at the right stage, so that they will end up with overripe and slightly underripe just to get things off the trees. They could just process everything and bulk it and just not keep things separate. Not maybe just put the new like slightly wetter coffee together with some of the dry coffee and so on. They and so that's a big difference, all the work that Jaime and his family and Enciso are doing with the coffee compared to a regular farm, coupled with the fact that they actually go and cup their own coffees. They actually go and taste it, which to us makes complete sense. Of course you gotta taste your own product. But the reality for a lot of farmers is that they never actually cup and taste their own coffee. So very unique. And we get 2 containers from Colombia, right?
And Colombia is great because it starts its harvest around end April, mid-April, and then it ends its first big harvest around August, which means that we can get the coffee home before Christmas, which is why our Christmas coffees are almost always fresh Colombian coffees because they arise here in November.
It's such a fantastic thing because a lot of the other coffees we buy are in the other half of the year, in the Danish summertime, and we'll start getting Kenyans in maybe May. Sometimes I've had them in April, but usually it's May, and then you have Ethiopia a little later, and Guatemala, Panama, and so on. All comes in within a relatively short time span. So this is exactly the other end of the year.
Yeah, exactly. And also when you take into account that then the second part of the harvest starts pretty much immediately, around October and lasts until end January. So the coffee you're going to get in this subscription video is harvested in that period. And so we get 2 shipments a year, one just before Christmas and then one here in the spring, which is just landed today actually. It's
literally just landed. So
So it's a good setup for us and a good setup for you guys that you get fresh coffees in periods of the year where a lot of fresh coffee isn't to be found.
So what should people be looking for in these 2 different coffees? They are grown in different regions, it's different farms, it's probably some of the same varieties, but that also might be the difference. But flavor-wise, what should people pay attention to?
Well, I think if we start in Huila around Gigante,
which is the Jaime Casallas.
It's just a very well-produced coffee. I think it's just so clean and delicate. It mostly consists of 2 varieties actually, which is the Pink Bourbon, which is a super interesting variety, has a lot of kind of floral characteristics to it. And then it's
quickly become one of my favorite varieties.
And it grows so well in Colombia. It has a big yield, which is a massive benefit for the Colombian farmers, and it's also pretty durable. So it's not as susceptible to disease, which is, it's a great variety. And then it's actually mixed in with a bit of geisha as well. So it's that's what's in there.
Wow. That explains, because the Pink Bourbon actually has some of those like floral traits as well. But here it's like, it's not like a geisha from Esmeralda or Takesi, but it's very light and it's very floral still. And it's just super enjoyable in that way, that you have that kind of like lightness and aromatic aftertaste. And for me, it's also very just kind of like, I wouldn't say juicy like the Kenyans, but it's more like a cordial kind of thing. I'm going like, you have this like very light, acidic, pleasing aftertaste.
So great coffee.
Super good.
On the other hand here,
Enciso to me there's a lot more body. It's more like, it's more full-bodied, it's like bigger mouthfeel, but it's also more like, it's where this one is more floral, here you have more fruit going on.
It is, and this has kind of these delicate layers to it of the floral notes and kind of light.
On the Jaime,
And then you have here much more kind of a punch in your face. Super fresh, acidic, full-bodied.
For me, it would score super high in acidity and in body or mouthfeel as well. As well as sweetness. It's a very dense coffee in a way. Like you get a lot more like intensity of flavors in it.
These farms are not far apart, and like you said, in this case the varieties are very different. In the Enciso family, they grow predominantly Caturra and Colombia. Caturra is very known for its kind of sweetness and its kind of velvety mouthfeel, and the Bourbon is normally characterized as a more kind of stock coffee they use. It's very persistent. It's one of those hybrids created for Colombia and specific. But this tastes like a Kenyan coffee. It's just very, very intense, very acidic. But Jaime suddenly, you don't normally characterize his as very balanced, kind of a round, well-developed coffee, whereas suddenly that's very light and kind of elegant. And then you get just on the other side of a mountain, and you have Enciso, who then has this pungent, high acidity coffee, which is it's a good pairing.
And a good way of showcasing how much different flavor you can get out of one country. So go explore these. You'll be traveling to Colombia pretty soon. Back to visit them. It's been a while.
It's been 2 years.
Wow.
The COVID situation kind of put us put an end to this, and they've just started to open up. In Colombia, they've done a good job of completely isolating the farmers because a lot of the rural area doesn't get hit as hard, so they don't want any visitors to come up into the mountains. So of course we're taking our precautions and all that stuff, but now they've started to open up, and it's going to be amazing. There's a lot of stuff that you miss out on when you're not there. Just being able to talk contracts in person instead of doing it half over email, half over WhatsApp and whatever. We made it work throughout the pandemic, but now getting down there and actually having a conversation with them again and talking about, first of all, talking about how great the quality has been and how happy we were with the products, but also updating everything that we haven't been able to update the last 2 years.
And giving them the opportunity to ask questions the other way as well.
Exactly.
I think it's been such a testament to the way that we operate in meeting face to face with the farmers.
Yeah.
The fact that we have been able to, or been unable to do this for, during COVID for almost 2 years, has really cemented the importance of going there, visiting people, seeing eye to eye, talking as equals, not as just a buyer-seller relationship.
Exactly.
And then, sharing feedback on coffees, information for us to learn what has happened at the farm, what are the new realities, what are they experimenting with, all these things.
Yeah.
It's so valuable, and it's something you don't get when you're at a distance and buying through a broker or an importer and via emails and so on. But that direct relationship is incredibly important.
And it is. And it also shows through the pandemic that's actually what made it work for us a lot through the pandemic is the time that we spent down there. Yeah. But now it's also really nice to be able to come back and further develop that relationship.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing this wealth of information. We hope you enjoyed watching this. I certainly enjoyed hearing more and learning a bit more about Colombia. And we'll see you another time for some more exciting coffees. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.